You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. Could much of what we mistake for being unwell come down to simple depletion? Stay tuned for today's episode. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer. What if everything we've been told about holistic health, healing, and well-being is only part of the story? Because thriving in today's world looks different than it used to. Here, we challenge the narratives, rethink what it means to become human, and explore how that shapes the way we lead, live, and step into our full potential. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. We hold far more influence over how we feel each day than we tend to give ourselves credit for. Much of our energy, our focus, and our mood traces back to a few simple foundations that are completely within our power to implement. Dr. Matthew Campbell is a licensed clinical psychologist with over 20 years of experience helping people improve their mental health and daily functioning. Based in Oxford, Mississippi, his work focuses on a simple but often overlooked idea. Most people aren't broken, they're depleted. Through his framework, our Primal 5, Dr. Campbell emphasizes 5 foundational areas that directly impact energy, clarity, and consistency: sleep, sunlight, movement, connection, and consumption. His approach is practical and science-based, designed to help people rebuild capacity in a way that actually supports lasting change. He is the creator of the Our Primal 5 workbook, a 5-week guide to strengthening these foundations, and is currently developing a companion app that provides daily tracking and feedback to help users stay consistent. Let's meet Dr. Matthew Campbell. Hi, Matt. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you. We will be talking a little bit about your idea of the Primal 5, and I'm super excited to find out what that is and what that entails. And it's so interesting because I feel this ties into a lot of the holistic health and healing that we all can use a little bit more of nowadays. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. And I don't know, I feel like I just really love talking about these things that support us in our well-being because everyone seems to be so stressed out and anxious about everything these days. So thanks for taking the time to come on today and share that with us. And would you like to maybe start us off with a little bit about yourself, your journey, your story, the parts that you feel connect to what you do today, and also share with our listeners what it is that you do today?
Yeah, I am a psychologist. I've been a psychologist for over 20 years, and my work involves both psychotherapy as well as psychological assessments. And both in my work as well as in my personal life, I've noticed again and again, as you were saying, how much the world we're living in now and the immense number of choices and how far it's taken us from what we're made for, how much that impacts all of us. And oftentimes the things that we think are the problems often are rooted in us not taking care of the basics of what humans are supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like common sense, but yet this is sometimes incredibly hard to adapt our lives to and to integrate into our lives. Harder than I feel it should be for us, but that's exactly what happens. So how do you find that when you work with your clients or patients, what do you usually see when they come to see you? And what have you noticed over time of working in this field that has really, I want to say, set you on the track of what you're working on today?
Most of my clients, most of those that come in, I think that when we talk about these different things, them being sleep and getting outside, moving their bodies, being connected and watching what we're putting in our bodies, what we consume, I think, like you said, I think that most people both recognize that these are things that they need to be doing, but so often their lives, the world, the short-term options that are available are keeping them from it. And so I think oftentimes it's something where maybe not embarrassment, but certainly an acknowledgement that these are things that they need to be doing. However, I think oftentimes people don't recognize just how important these are. And I think that there are a few reasons for that, maybe most of which is that they're accustomed to being depleted in these areas. So it's what they know. And I think that for all of us, we have to experience something. It's like the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And we often lack the wisdom of how tremendously impactful these areas of our lives are.
Yeah, so well said. And I feel, as you said, knowing something and doing something are two different things when it comes to our lives. And a lot of us, we read blogs, listen to podcasts, and we know all the things that we should be doing. When it comes to putting that into practice, we have work that's distracting us, taking care of our families. And at the end of the day, very often there doesn't seem to be a lot of time left to do things for ourselves. So, yeah, I very much understand that. And I feel something a lot of us are struggling with, and just on a very practical level. So how have you started to put this in practice? I feel that you have developed some really amazing ideas around this, and then also how you work with your clients. So what does that look like when you have them come into your practice and they are so depleted or exhausted all the time, they're not feeling well? A lot of people might not think that this is connected to psychology, right? That there's a psychological component because these seem like physical things going on. So how do you make a sense of that for your clients when you work with them?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that oftentimes people don't connect the psychological impacts of these different areas. For example, I don't think people realize that movement and exercise, the research shows it can be every bit as effective as an antidepressant. I don't think that people realize how tremendously impactful morning sunlight is on sleep and how it affects our mood. I don't think that people fully appreciate how loneliness, which is an epidemic, I know in the States, there's even a white paper on loneliness and how 50 to 60% of people report loneliness, just how impactful that is for us as humans from an emotional perspective. And so the way that I try to approach it is to begin by taking or addressing that aspect where we know these things, they are in a certain respect simple, but I think it's also important to begin with the acknowledgement and the understanding that these are more difficult for us than they ever were before. So our ancestors, they did not have climate controlled environments to stay inside 92% of the time, or they were outside, they were pack animals. We survived with other people and with connection. They had to live that way. They had to move to survive. They didn't have the choices for all of these processed foods or technology that was constantly available. And so we do have to work at this and be more intentional with this. And we need to think in a long-term way, as opposed to our natural tendency, which is short-term. And so I think that it's important to recognize that this is not a shame-based thing. This is not someone just not doing the smart or simple things. It's a challenge for us, and it's an important thing to be intentional with. And then, as to your point, I want to educate and help people to understand how much they affect their lives. And then the next step is what we've developed, the development of an approach to take a step-by-step measure approach to taking care of each of these things, in highlighting that we're looking for progress. We're not looking to be perfect with any of these things, Perfection's not an option, so let's take that off the table. And so we're just trying to improve. We're trying to be more conscious and create some movement in these different regards, particularly those where we may not be aware that we're really depleted.
That makes a lot of sense, because I feel that if we do go for doing anything perfect or waiting for the perfect time, going to add a little bit more stress to our plates getting all this right. So I think it's, as you said, just better to start making progress, do the little things and get going on it so you can habituate yourself to a bit of a change, a bit more movement, and then go from there. So I think we've all tried to make massive changes and then those New Year's resolutions and stuff. And then 2 months later, nobody's doing anything anymore. So yeah, having this more measured and guided approach to smaller things that we can work on and make progress with. I think that's brilliant. Walk us through the things that you feel are very important in this. I know that at the beginning of the episode, you had shared with me also the Primal 5. Let us know what that is and what sense that connects to what we've been talking about and how our listeners can understand that.
So our Primal 5 is organized under that idea that our bodies are the same as those our ancestors had, but the world we're living in is so different. And so the idea is to take an approach where week by week we work on these different areas. So we begin with sunlight. We begin with something that is perhaps one of the more underappreciated parts of being a human, of how important it is to be outside. And so that is where we begin. And then we move into sleep and the next week is trying to make adjustments within our sleep. We know a tremendous amount about sleep. We know a tremendous amount about ways in which we can improve sleep. Some of them people refer to as sleep hygiene, but it goes beyond that for sleep management. And we try to learn and give information as well as some practical approaches and ways of monitoring. So we work in that conditioning, because sleep is so much having to do with conditioning. Then we move to movement. We use the term movement because I think that a lot of times when people hear exercise, they often get into what you were referring to, of that perfection, of kind of an extreme approach. And we're not looking for someone to be able to lift a small car or run a super marathon or ultra, whatever they're called. That's not our goal. Our goal is to move our bodies. And so we go into that. We go into the fourth week is the importance of being connected, meaningfully connected with other people, where that interaction, that engagement, that is the end. It's not a means to an end. It's that human connection of genuine care, genuine meaning and value in being with one another. And then finally, and perhaps the largest, is the fifth week, which is referring to consumption. And that's not just physical consumption. It's not just food and the importance of water and watching for alcohol consumption or certainly substances, but it's also the mental consumption. Such an enormous issue these days with news media and how that affects us when we take in too much, certainly social media and how that can really get at the hooks in us. We know the effects of these and pornography, but these kind of things, again, this is not a judgmental approach. And I'm as human as they get. And these are things, sleep, for example. That's a tough one for me. It's something that I have to be really conscious of. I have to be really conscious of media consumption. I grew up in Washington, D.C., so I think that, or the suburbs. And so I think that we were taught as much as anyone, if not more, that you want to be informed. It's important to be informed, but we're not supposed to be immersed in these things. We weren't made to know what is happening in every part of the world at all times. And then, of course, our media is commercialized. It's made to keep us there. And so we're inundated with outrage and so many things that really are unhealthy for us from a mental health perspective.
Yeah, And there's a lot of it these days, I think more than our nervous systems can reasonably handle on all levels. So, yeah, I
Well, to
hear
that
you that.
point, is that's what's being tapped into.
Yeah.
If we talk about news, if we talk about media in general, is that it is trying to harp in on that aspect of us that the primal aspects, outrage, death and safety, sex, these kind of things. That is going to, our primal brain is going to orient to these things. And as you said, that's going to have a pretty significant impact on our nervous system.
When your clients come to work with you on this, I'm wondering probably some of their main concerns to start with aren't really around these specific points, but more, as you said in the beginning, just feeling burnt out or off or really stretched or depleted. And then understanding that all of these pieces really are part of what they're experiencing. So, what are you finding that when they're coming through this process and week by week they're making small changes and they're starting to reorient a little bit? What do you find happens in their lives, to their minds, bodies, how they live and thrive or don't thrive? What are you finding happens when they follow this Primal 5 journey that you have laid out?
It's a really fulfilling, from a professional point of view, a really fulfilling experience, because I think that people, when they begin to really work at these things in and of themselves, them prioritizing them has its own benefits in and of itself. That all of a sudden I feel like I'm accomplishing something, and that's tremendously useful. All of a sudden we feel some agency and empowerment. And I think that when we realize, in a world in which there's so many things that affect us that we don't have control over, when we start to focus on the things that we actually do have control over that have such a huge impact on our lives, I think that in and of itself has great benefits. And then, especially when people become aware of the areas where they're depleted and they start to work on them, I have found that when we get that connection socially, in terms of that human connection, I've noticed that's the one that seems to have the quickest benefit for people. I certainly would say movement as well really helps people. And then of course sleep, we're going to benefit profoundly. But that is such a fulfilling experience. And I think that I found people are really responsive when we start to highlight how much, for example, our sleep impacts our attention and our mood and makes us more anxious when we're depleted. And so it's really fulfilling.
Yeah, I can see how that would make a huge difference in people's lives as they're starting to put those pieces together. At the same time, I feel that you probably hear a lot of the reasons why people can't do any of those things or why they're struggling with them. And what are you finding challenges people? What are you finding stands in our way a lot of implementing some of these things or making the changes? Where do you find people run into the most resistance?
I think that oftentimes we do live busy lives. I think oftentimes we may overestimate that in many ways. I think that we often don't recognize many of the times where we are doing things that we have open time, basically, that it's not quite as busy as we perceive it to be. Now, I have had times. I remember being fired by one client because this was someone who was a single parent and we were working on sleep. And for this person, one of the things about sleep management is that when we wake at night, if we wake, oftentimes anxiety will wake us in the middle of the night. And so when that occurs, one of the things about sleep management is that if we wake and we're having a hard time getting back to sleep, what the literature tells us is that we don't want to lay in bed frustrated and restless. If we're not about to fall back asleep after 15 minutes or so, we want to get out of bed and we want to do a low stimulation activity. Okay, we don't want to open a screen. We don't want to do something. And we also don't want to do something useful, as strange as that may sound. Because what that does, if we get up and we do the laundry, we do the dishes, we do something productive, work, what have you, what that's doing is it's giving a function or a purpose for our insomnia. And so we don't want to do that. And this was a single parent, and they were extraordinarily busy, and they most certainly were. And so my encouragement to not do something productive was not tolerable to that person. And I understand it, and try to work and make it apply to our lives. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. That's not going to be useful. But there are times in which our schedules and our busyness affects us. And I also think that's a time that we need to take stock of, if my life is one in which I cannot be healthy, perhaps I need to take a step back and evaluate my values.
That's a really good point. I think that often we don't look at it that way. We are trying to take stock what actually needs to be in our lives and what we can maybe bump off or let go of or do less of. So, yeah. Have you found that in many cases, and as you said, there will be exceptions, some people really will have their hands so full, there's not much room for anything. But I think in most cases, have you actually found that it's less of a I don't have time issue in reality and more of a prioritizing issue, that we're not putting ourselves in that place of priority and other things come into that place like screen time or this or that? What have you found around that? And is that something that we can maybe learn to reframe, to give ourselves that love and care that we need to be healthy? But how do people, I think from a psychological standpoint, what are you finding in that sense with your clients?
I just so agree with the way you put that. I really think that it begins with awareness. I think that is often something like, for example, when I had said to you that we're often not quite as busy as we think, I would imagine that many people might hear that and think, this guy has no idea. He has no idea how busy my life is. And while that's true, I also think that when we improve our awareness, I think that we can see some things where certainly we may not have wide times or periods of time that are available. There are often times where we are doing things, as you mentioned, technology, these kind of things. And there's nothing inherently wrong with doing those. Moderation's the key. So there are going to be times and that we do some of these things, that's fine. But I think that it creates a narrative for us. I'm guilty of this. I'm a father of 4 boys. I'm married. I have a full-time job. I have been trying to work on this workbook and an app and these kind of things. I'm busy. But when I really look at it, I think to myself, okay, at night when you're not getting to bed on time, what are you doing? Well, it's often not very productive. These aren't productive things. And I'll be the first to admit that even though I have all these things and I can create a narrative of how I just can't do all these things, I am as guilty as anyone of this thing. But increasing my awareness helps tremendously. Increasing the knowledge of, okay, I could be doing these kind of things, helping, as you mentioned, my nervous system, and I'm going to benefit. And if I just invest in that for some time, I can gain that wisdom of how impactful it is.
Yeah, I can only imagine with 4 boys. I'm sure you have your hands full throughout the day. Yeah, that would definitely give you a very busy schedule and really put into practice what you're teaching people in your own life as well.
It helps, right? It helps all of us to recognize how things affect us, that it is not something that we're coming and encouraging people for something that we do perfectly. I think that we all have challenges with these things. And it's so helpful to me in working with people that I recognize. I think that we often, if we can really empathize, really understand, it can help a great deal in communicating and encouraging people in these regards.
How do you find that this is, I want to say, manageable with a family, can you bring in your family members into this as well? Because I know, especially with kids, they run on their own schedule. So when you're saying, oh, at this time I want to do some self-care, or I want to go to bed at 10, it just doesn't always work that way. Can you incorporate your family members into this process as well? Make this a bit more manageable and more realistic for people to bring this into their lives. What have you found around that?
I think that one of the most powerful learning approaches for all of us is modeling. It is that when we see others doing things, then we are pretty likely, oftentimes, depending on how it works out for them, but we're pretty likely to mimic or use them as a model. And I've certainly found with my kids, and by no means do I give this credit to myself. My wife is a very hardworking, clean eating, exercise focused human. But I think that, my kids, what I've noticed about them is they do many of these things quite well. I think some of it's through modeling, but the thing that is challenging for them is technology. It's what they know, it's what they've grown up with. It's very natural in their lives. But I think that getting back to that point, I think that making a priority of these things, there will be nights. Last night was one of them for me, where it was a late night with activities. With one of my sons had baseball, and so we were at it late and getting home late. And my sleep, certainly the bedtime wasn't great last night, and that's okay. That's okay. I'll get back at it tonight. And that's the key to any change, is realizing we're not going to be perfect. Having a slip isn't failure. It's part of a change process. So I'll get back to it. But I do think that modeling component can be tremendously helpful, because we can all get moving in these regards.
Yeah. And then it becomes, I think, a little bit easier too, to actually make some of these changes permanent. If everyone is on the same page, you're modeling, people are actually, there's a lot of excitement sometimes about this too, because when everybody starts feeling better, relationships improve as well. I feel when we're constantly depleted and tired and irritable, it's not the greatest foundation for us to also have productive and intimate relationships. So I feel that all comes together to really improve not just family dynamics, but also with our work colleagues, our friends, our acquaintances. When we're in that much better place, we're healthy, we're more balanced, I feel we connect much better too. So there's a bit of a catch-22 in that, in my eyes, that if we especially talk about loneliness or isolation, sometimes even coming into a better space ourselves actually helps support that, and us feeling better to connect with others and carry on those relationships. So yeah, I feel 100% all of this is so interconnected and so interwoven, and all comes back to each other.
I
Really,
couldn't
really.
agree more. And I think that one of the ways that I see what you were just describing, and the interconnectedness and these different things, I've seen a lot of people who've, for example, value family and value being a parent tremendously. And the way that it shows up, the way that they exhibit it, is they just do so much, whether it's working to provide for their family, or spending time with their kids, or just going that extra mile again and again. It leads to depletion in many regards. And then there's this aspect of it where I'm fatigued, I'm not doing the things. And many of those things help us with emotional regulation. And so what they find is that they're irritable and they're short. And so they are doing so much that they're trying to do to be the best they can for family and friends. And at the end of the day, it's leading to fatigue, and they're getting irritated. And there's this cruel irony that they end up negatively affecting those relationships, because they're depleted and their resources aren't there to deal with frustrations and hassles. And so, again, I think that just taking a step back, taking stock, observing where we are, can really help us live in such a value-based way.
Yeah. And I think we certainly see that more and more, especially, with single parents also, people who already have challenges with their time available to them, where that becomes even more pronounced than across the board. So so important to start working with all of these pillars that you described. And if our listeners are curious now and they want to know more about the Primal 5, or they want to connect and maybe start working in some of those things in their own lives, how can they connect with you, Matt? And what kind of programs, services, resources would you have available for listeners to connect with?
There are a few things. We have a website. It's ourprimal5, the number 5.com. And on the website, we have access to a newsletter that goes over many of these things that people can subscribe to. There will be a quiz on the website that will help us kind of answer 10 questions and go over where they are in these regards, where they may benefit from some work. And then there's also the workbook. So we've developed a workbook, which is a 5-week approach to improving these different areas of our lives. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and it's called, again, Our Primal 5. And then finally, we're in the beta testing stages. And hopefully by the time people hear this, that the app will be available on Android and Apple. That will really, I believe, will help people not only to become more aware and to see where we're having difficulties, but it will have things where we can do it with a friend. We can do it with someone else where we're working on these things together, and it'll show trends of what's happening, how things may be connected in our life and with our mood. And so that's about ready.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And hopefully by the time we air this, you can already access all of those resources that Matt just shared. And we, of course, will be linking to all of this in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there for how you can actually access all of those things. I find that apps are always really exciting because you can carry them with you in your pocket. And yes, we're adding to screen time with that, but I feel we're also doing something for ourselves in that moment. So a little bit more positive screen time, maybe, when it comes to the apps.
At least the app's letting you know when you need to get off of apps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So thank you so very much for joining me today and sharing about this. I feel this is such important information. If we don't have these foundations in place, it's going to be very difficult for us to actually feel really well, live optimally, and also thrive in a lot of areas of our lives. So yeah, I'm very glad that you joined me today. And thanks for sharing your wisdom with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, amazing. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. I hope you walk away with some of the things that you can start thinking about and becoming more aware of in your own lives. And of course, connect with the resources that Matt shared. And I look forward to hearing you again very soon in another episode. And until then, take care of yourselves and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejōrni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.